Hello. I hope everybody can hear me. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Uh, my name is, I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Um, let's begin. My name is Aslam Mohammad. I am a director for fraud solution at BPC. And today I'm going to talk about um, the fraud arena in the payment space, especially focusing on the cards and how machine learning capabilities have been helping a lot of uh, financial institutions who are adopting it quite rapidly because of the game-changing environment they are seeing, and the fraud is migrating, from one scheme to another. So without further ado, let's begin. I'm moving on to the next slide. So this is the agenda I've put up for you today. We're going about just touching briefly about the fraud landscape, the challenges that are being faced by financial institutions such as yours. And also, we'd like to discuss a bit about why is fraud happening when almost all financial institutions have some sort of a solution in place to combat fraud. Then I'm going to talk about how machine learning is being adopted rapidly in the market today. How is that being a game changer in this fraud environment? And then how you can empower your customers with some of the things they would be happily able to adapt to and be able to control their spending. So moving on to the next slide. Like they say, it's no news is good news. So the bad news to begin with, as you all agree with me that fraud rates are really up, and fraudsters are getting much more organized, as opposed to the clumsy method they used in the past. Um, Attacks are getting very, very sophisticated and targeted. Um, uh, Payment ecosystem today is more complex. If you look back about 20 years ago, the transaction for payment cards were quite simple. It's just the credit card, and then came into debit cards and chip and pin and so on and so forth. But now there are whole new ecosystem that's available for you to facilitate that payment. But the good news is, there is more control data that is available, analytical tools that are available, and computing power is getting much more cheaper than before. So you can have a sophisticated system which is utilizing the power of the CPU, to look at transactions in real time. That's available today, and a lot of these financial institutions are adopting and are making those strategic investments in the capabilities to combat fraud, right? And at the same time, companies are restructuring and they are aligning to fraud into a single enterprise detection system as opposed to silo-based system where each department looked at its own lines of businesses. That's changing together, and at the same time, there's a lot of help available out there. Financial institutions are more willing to now participate and exchange ideas and information on how to tackle fraud of different types. So the challenges, all right, this is the report from the industry gurus, Nelson report, where they are predicting that by 2020, we will see about $31 billion in terms of payment card losses. Now, this is only for cards. It does not include internet banking, mobile banking. This is only for payment cards. So if you look at, credit, debit, ATMs, so on and so forth, right? So for every dollar, 7 cents or 6 cents will be contributed toward loss, right? And most of the banks have, taken this as a part of doing business, right? So, but the thing is, how do you minimize this cost? Which you call part of doing is the cost of doing business, but how do you minimize that cost? Now, this is a very interesting slide which tells you about the sentiment of a consumer, when he sees fraud or he or her sees fraud in his account, right? How do they react? So if you look at this, I've taken this from Euromonitor, and you can see this that, a lot of these consumers are quite sensitive towards fraud. Now, chances are it's going to impact you negatively because fraud will drive attrition. And the thing is, if some customers might just close their accounts with you, some might not close their accounts, but still, your card goes into the back of their wallet. It is not used that much like it used to be before. And in this case, you are going to lose revenue as well. You are risking a reputation, and you are also losing revenue. So this is how people react globally. And you can see based in, whether it's in Asia or in, Europe or North America, the sentiments are pretty much the same. If you look at US, they are a bit more sensitive. You can see that a majority of them, 70% of them will close their accounts with you because there's so much choices available for them to move on, right? So you got to look at this, that fraud actually will drive attrition, and you got to be careful about this. Now, as I mentioned earlier, why does payment fraud continues to grow in spite of the fact that, we are now, entire world, and US is getting there as well now, is it has got an EMV card. There's going to be, it was a massive cost to the industry to replace all cards with magnetics, from magnetic strip to a chip card. Some countries even adopted chip and PIN. UK is one of the big examples, right? And most banks today have sophisticated fraud systems. So you gone are the days where you will just see rule-based system triggering cases or declining transactions. Right. So in most places, rule-based system has been replaced with, some sort of analytics, be it neural network or some other sort of model, which is actually evaluating transactions in real time. So the question that begs here is, why does it continue to grow? Now, the simple reason for this is fraud has always been migratory in nature, right? So, and it keeps evolving, right? So, and I always give this example of, it's like a balloon. So you press it on one side, it'll pop out from the other side, right? Now, and also fraudsters are getting well organized, and they will attack the channel of risk resistance, right? So wherever they find that you don't have enough protection, they will go into that area and try their luck, right? And they're getting more and more sophisticated, more organized in that way. And as you know, each channel has its own nuance, right? So, I mean, when combating credit card is not the same as when you combat, mobile banking or internet banking, ATM as such. So these are all specific lines of businesses which have unique problems that we need to address. So there has to be a paradigm shift in how you detect or combat fraud today. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there are better tools available in the market which can be used, in your arsenal of, things that you use to fight combat fraud. There are a lot of new technologies that are available in the market, right? And traditionally there was, a lot of vendors who used to have, and analytical models or, neural network models that can be deployed to, score each transaction as it comes in. But, the question is one size fits all situation where, you have one model that is looking at transactions from different lines of businesses or channels, right? For example, a post transaction versus an ATM transaction versus a card not present transaction. Does it all have to go through the same model to be scored, right? So that's the question that needs to be asked. And on top of that, better profiling techniques are available. How are you profiling your customer? Do you know your customer's behavior, right? So that's one good aspect of tools that are available today to help you to profile your customers better and get that profiling variable be used by your model to score things differently, right? So if so you need multiple models, perhaps. Looking at different lines, it's more focusing on different lines of businesses and seeing those transactions from that perspective. So you need a system that is multi-channel and also can do cross-channel monitoring for you, and it's able to run multiple models and deciding on which model to be deployed or to be scored when this particular transaction is happening. So let's look at these 6 primary performance dimensions that are actually used in the market today to actually gauge the effectiveness of a fraud solution. So beginning on the left, you can see that it's the fraud losses that you need to reduce. What are your operating expenses in order to save those money? What are your expenses you are incurring? What is the impact on your revenue? Your customer experience, compliance, and finally, reputation risk of your organization. Now, the strategy today adopted by a lot of financial institutions are, protect with the customers. Okay, fine. Let's look at these 5 different metrics first, and then we can look at the customer experience after that, right? Now, there's also a myth that if I sort of, focus on my customer experience because I want to retain my customers, I want to have a seamless experience, then I have to forego the other 5 dimensions in the equation. That is a myth, as I said, and a lot of these can be, coexist, right? You can have all of them at acceptable levels if you have the right approach and have the right tools and capabilities to do that, right? So let's talk about this and how you can achieve that using some of the, state-of-the-art technologies that's available in the market today. So you need to have a system, as BTC sees it, is a system that is also looking at your different lines of business and different channels as the transaction happens, and it can be modular. So you put them in as you are ready with that. At the same time, you are using a multiple components which are repeatable, which are common components as we call it. So you have a set of models, data models. You have a set of rules repository. You have an enterprise case manager, and you have a reporting tool that is able to give you those widgets and dashboards for different lines of businesses. So the learning curve is very stiff. They're using the same components over and over again. Your customer experience is going to remain the same because he doesn't have these differences in experience when he's dealing with his credit card versus his debit card versus his internet banking. So there are some questions that are being raised on the side, but I will address them later on as we go on. And some of these questions might be answered as we move on, right? So having a base of common components that are being used, to find different lines of businesses, from issuing to acquiring to digital banking, and now into digital wallet and so on. So the approach that the BPC is taking is a 3-pronged approach. Analyze the transaction in real time as it comes in, then you make a decision, and finally, how do you communicate that back to your customer? So in the analysis part, we do this profiling, we do the scoring, by the models, And each of these models are different, so they're looking at different lines of businesses and different scenarios. So, for example, card not present transaction versus cross-border transactions. They are two different models. They are focusing on just these aspects of the transaction and being able to score them in real time. And then finally, then you strategize on what is the risk appetite, how do you want to decision this particular transaction in real time, and finally, how do you get that communicated back to the customer? Through a two-way SMS, single SMS, an email, maybe a call. So, these are the different components that you use to analyze, decide, and finally communicate to your customer. Right. First of all is, as I mentioned earlier, the reporting tool allows you to create dashboards of information of what's really happening in your financial institution. You are not concerned with what's happening around the world, but you're more focused on what's happening, where is the fraud coming from, how much is being saved, how much being lost, what are the type of frauds you are seeing. So these are some of these predefined widgets that we provide you, dashboard, and you can create your own. Where you see this plus sign here, where you can create your own dashboard, and this gets updated in real time. Another this also tells you another information: where is the hotspot, from which country are you seeing most of your fraud being perpetrated from, so on and so forth. So these are basically user designable. You can design and create whatever is important for you to see and present. Then let's talk about, we've been talking about harping around machine learning. Let's talk a bit about machine learning. So the question that begs here is human versus machine, right? And we all agree that in repetitive tasks, machines are far better than humans, right? And we all know that the fraudulent transactions, they have very much different characteristics than the legitimate ones, right? So machine is able to recognize those thousands of different features that are used in this purchase journey of a consumer, rather than looking at just few that are used in creating those rules. For example, typically when you're writing rules, you are looking at just the common variables such as the amount, the country code, where is the transaction happening, the MCC code, what type of MCC code is he, right? So is it a gas station? Is it a gambling a gambling house? So, or a betting house. So you look at these transactions, whether this is a sort of a donation site. So you look at these variables and then you write rules around that. So remember, when you write rules, you need to understand what is the modus operandi of the fraud before you can convert that into the rules and be able to deploy it. And then by the time you do that, fraud might have migrated to something else, right? So you need to be quick and very agile in being able to detect these different scenarios as it happens, right? And once you identify these thousands of features, algorithms can be written on these features to be able to then provide some sort of weight to that particular transaction, right? And when processing large data sets, machines are faster and much better than humans. And they are able to see very deep into the data and make concrete predictions because they are able to recognize the patterns that is being, that is obvious in those transaction historical data. So what we are introducing into the market is something that it's not very common. You don't see that very common. But what we are now introducing to the market is a concept called self-service machine learning. This is whereby, we are providing you a tool whereby you can design your own models, and be able to design as many as you want. Typically what happens is when you have a model that you buy from a vendor, they are slow to adjust because by the time you give your data to them, you are seeing this particular kind of fraud that is not being detected by your current model, because the trends have changed, the pattern has changed, they are not able to recognize. So by the time you collate all this information and send it to your vendor for them to customize this model for you, and by the time it gets delivered to you, it could already be 3 months old, right? So when that happens, you will find that the fraud might have migrated to something else. It is more expensive because every time you get the vendor to build a model for you, um, there's a charge to it, right? And you, as a consumer, as a financial institution, has less visibility and control over the development of that model. Your task is just to provide the data to the vendor, and they will then, using their expertise, design and build that model for you. So we are taking a new approach where we are letting you be on the driver's seat. You have the control over the data and the features of that model. So you decide, what length of data do you want to use from end to end. You decide which transaction you want to focus on. For example, I just want to create a model for card not present transaction because I'm seeing a rise in my CNP fraud. So, I'm taking my historical data, which is about 3, 4, 5 months old, and I'm just applying those transactions that has got card not present in them, right? And getting the model to train it and then, deploy it as soon as possible for me to be able to catch the next fraud, right? So, like I said, you have this control, and multiple models can be created and deployed, and they can exist, in parallel. And we are using the data that is being used by your bank itself or financial institution itself, as opposed to global data, right? Because you are concerned with what is happening in your bank right now, right? It is cheaper and faster to get the model delivered and get it into production, right? And there's no involvement by the vendor is required once you are trained on how to do that. So let me show you some slides on how easy we have made it. So let's move on to the next slide. Yeah. Right. So with the model learning neural network technology, you are able to dramatically reduce your false positive, which is also, in other words, impacting your customers. You're improving your decision-making capabilities by your team. You are protecting against human error by keeping things much simpler, and let the machine do most of the analytic part, right? So you are able to find more fraud using that technique, right? And getting a greater insight on fraud and be able to recognize patterns faster from your data. So, you have this case data which has all the genuine and fraud transactions, and you're able to then recognize that pattern faster using these capabilities, right? Like I said earlier, one size fits all is not the name of the game anymore. You're getting more targeted. You're getting very concise models that are targeting each lines of businesses and each type of transaction as such, right? It's the true self-service. We are. It's like we are giving you a cockpit for all level of users to be able to then be in the driving seat and be able to then train these models. And also, before putting it into production, as you will see in the next couple of slides, you're actually able to see the performance of this new model against your historical data on how much fraud are you going to detect, how much it's going to be the false positive, and then use this on the threshold. And I'll share those slides with you in the next couple of slides. So moving on to the next. In our model learning capabilities, it's basically a GUI-based application, which allows, so you decide, so first you configure, you prepare, you train the data, you discover the effectiveness of the model, and then you finally export it into production. Now, in the configuration side, you see that you are able to choose the length of data, how much of data you want, 3 months, 6 months, and then it gives you an analysis of how much genuine transactions are there, how many fraudulent transactions that are in these rules, in this data set. And then you can decide in the prepare mode, you can decide on what transaction to focus on. So for example, you can say, okay, give me all the authorizations where there has been card not present, right? So you have all the fields that those are available in the transactions. It will appear on your GUI, and you are able to then select the type of transaction. You can even say that only show me transactions which are greater than a certain amount. It has to be card not present, and it has to be greater than a certain amount. You can do that, right? And finally, once you are ready with the subset of data, you're ready with the fields that you're looking to focus on, you are then able to click a button and train this model. So this model will then do repetitive task of what a neural model does. It does many epochs, as we call it. Every training set, every time a model is run through a set of data is called an epoch. So every epoch, then it gives you a finally, then it decides, because we have built in those algorithms, it decides what is the best model, that can be created using this data set, and then after that, it gives you a pictorial view of how much fraud is going to catch, how much false positive, how much cases you are going to generate, and there's a ruler that is provided for you to move the threshold. And as you move the threshold, you will be able to see how much fraud you will detect, and at the same time, how much cases you will have to work on to be able to detect that kind of KPIs, right? And finally, once you're satisfied with that performance, you are able to then export it into the production environment, and at the same time, you get a PDF copy of the model report, which then can be signed by your superiors before it is moved into production, right? So let's move on to the next slide. Right, this is what I was talking about. So finally, in this phase where you are able to then see the results of the model, so it tells you this ruler where you see my cursor is basically, this is your threshold level. When you slide this ruler, these values will change. It will tell you that, at this score band, how much fraud you will detect, what is going to be a false positive, how much you're going to save in terms of your fraud losses, and how much you're going to actually incur, right? And as I mentioned earlier, it's cost of doing business, right? So, and the idea is to minimize that cost. So this is something that you will not see much vendors do today. They have a model. I'm not saying they do not. They have an analytical tool. They also give you a report of how that model is supposed to perform in your environment. But again, it does not have that flexibility of you being able to influence what kind of model you are going to produce. And similarly, we have something that is what we call automated rules generation. This is where, similar to the model, it looks at your data and then it gives you suggestions of what rules you need to write in order to be able to detect these type of fraud. So the flow is very much similar to the model development. But before that, let me just tell you, what is happening currently in an environment when you are trying to write a rule. As I mentioned earlier, that today, if you have a rule-based system, and even with the model, you are finding that it's not able to catch because the fraud trends have sort of shifted. You need to identify the fraud first. You need to find out what is the modus operandi. You need to find out, what are where the frauds are coming from. You need to analyze your data, and then you have to convert that into the rules. And then finally, you have to test it. And then once you're satisfied with this test, you don't have too many false positives, and then you put into production, right? So this, at the best, can take 3 to 5 days for you to be able to do that before a new rule is deployed, tested, and deployed into production. Our smart rule process is very much similar to what I showed you with our model training, is where the system uses your case management data, which is obviously tech data, which has all the genuine and fraudulent transactions, and then it uses those case disposition to analyze and then find out where the fraud is coming from, and then it creates that rules for you and say these are the rules. It does that in pseudocode, very English-like and say, these are the rules you need to write. And along with that, it will give you, so this is the slide I was talking about. Uh, well, it's very much simple. So we look at your historical data, we prepare the data, we generate the rule set, we do the validation for you to tell you that, how much fraud is going to save, how much crease is going to create, and then finally you can deploy it into production. Or maybe you can convert that into your own system language and put that into your production. And you need to test this before you put, because there can always be a human error when you're converting that pseudocode into some sort of a rule. So the pattern is very similar to the way we design models. Again, in the rules writing, it look at your historical data. It creates those suggestions for you that these are the rules you need to write. And it also gives you, this picture is not very clear. Basically, these are the two rules that the system has written for you and giving you suggestion. At the same time, on the left-hand side, you are seeing, the strength of that rule. What is the strength of the rule in the scale of 1 to 20? How strong is that rule? How many fraud you will be able to detect? And again, it gives you that below here, it gives you that sort of a dashboard that tells you that this rule, this kind of false positive is expected. These kind of number of cases are expected to be created. So you got to make sure that you have enough manpower to be able to do that, right? Because if you have cases being created and you have no one to work on these cases, the purpose is defeated. And finally, so this is where you take control in your financial institutions, where you design models, or if you have a rules writer, then you design your own rules. And then finally, something for the consumer. And so today here we are dealing with the new millennial consumers. They are different. They want more power. So the recent survey conducted by the market industry leaders have suggested that a lot of the consumer, especially 50% of them, would prefer to control the way they use their card, and when should be allowed, when it should be denied. And all this is because they've been reading, they are quite knowledgeable, they've been reading what's happening around the world with the data bridges and all the different types of fraud that is being perpetrated, right? So the consumer today wants more control, more power in terms of how they control their spending. And in a way, it's a good, because, we make a good tech team, because, you have all the sophisticated applications and the tools that you're using to evaluate each transaction in real time. At the same time, there are certain tasks that you are allowing your consumer to perform, and they feel more empowered. They feel more assured with your bank. So what it does, basically, we call it can be called like a remote control for the card. And I call this sometimes, it's less artificial, more intelligent, because this is an app that allows them to control the behavior of their card, right? So they can control when and how they use their card. What kind of alerts they want to get received. So every time there is a cross-border transaction, send me a notification, things like that. So what that does, in a way, you as a financial institution benefit from the increased usage of your services and the card, because the customer is more at rest. He trusts your banks more. Because he finds that so much flexibility available and so much control that you have given them, right? So they feel empowered. At the same time, on the card side, there's increased customer confidence. Your revenue will increase because they will use this card more often because they have the control. So just imagine this is I am overseas right now, and I want to buy something online, something that I see that I like. So what I can do is I can immediately turn on this app on my mobile. Immediately go into this application and allow my card not present transaction to be to go through. I do my purchase, and I then go back to that app and just close this card not present. So which means that, after this transaction, if there's another attempt for another card not present transaction, it will be declined because I have switched that off. Similarly, I can also, if I'm traveling to a particular country, I can say that, okay, I'm going to Australia, so just allow transactions from Australia. So you can see that even after, if my card is compromised in Australia, when I come back, I can switch it off, and then no transaction from Australia will be allowed. So you can see that power that you give, and at the same time, it helps you fight that fraud, because now your customers are also helping you to combat that the fraud attacks. Right? So this is how it will look like. It's a simple app on your mobile phone, and why mobile? Because 90% of the people around us today are using our smartphones, and you can use these new technologies to better combat fraud attacks. Right. So once you empower your customer using this application, no matter where I go, my mobile phone will always be with me, right? Regardless of whatever else that might be with me or not, but my mobile will be with me, and I can use that to control my spending, as in how I like it, right? So this will then directly communicate to our fraud system, which will immediately, update the required parameters that needs to be updated for your particular card. So as soon as your card comes in for a transaction approval, these preferences are looked at first, and then if these preferences are not there, and even if you have the limit there, your card is, everything else is in order, the transaction doesn't seem to be very suspicious, but because you have indicated that you don't want these transactions to happen, it will be declined, and you can be notified that, a recent transaction of this amount, has been declined for whatever, right? So, and finally, once you have these systems and tools in place, you need to have a case manager, an enterprise case manager, that will allow you to look at cases and be able to understand where the fraud is coming from, or how do you communicate to the customer. So this is your first page where before you contact the customer, if it's going to be a real phone call from one of your analysts to the consumer, you got to have this screen on your in front of you to be able to see all the demographic information of the customers, his recent transaction. These basically on the right hand side here is all the different relationship this customer has with you. So what's his debit card, this is his credit card, these are his banking accounts, right? So you can see all this information before you talk to that customer. So that way you can also, if there's a cross-channel activities going on, you are able to see and talk to the customer, right? And down below, I'll move to the next screen, you will see all the different transactions. And the transaction that actually generated the case will be highlighted in red. So you will see that this particular transaction actually triggered via a rule or because of a score, and then you'll be able to communicate with the customer that, did you just do this transaction? And then on the left-hand side here, this is where you tag this transaction to be either genuine or fraudulent, and then you sort of status that case as confirmed fraud or non-fraud, and then you move on to the next one. So these data that you are capturing after talking to the customer are very essential, because these are ultimately being used by the model and by the auto rules generator to be able to generate these rules for you. Okay, so I'm done with my presentation. So I'll just, before I leave and open up for some questions, just like to give you some takeaways here. So remember, fraud is here to stay, right? A lot of institutions that I have talked to, they say this is, just the cost of doing business. But then again, how do you minimize that cost, right? This is the main goal, is to minimize that cost, right? So as I mentioned earlier, and I showed you earlier, you need a robust multi-channel fraud detection system that is able to see different types of transactions, see them in different light, use different models to score them in real time, and then you make your decision whether to decline or approve that transaction. And again, you have the ability to train the model, which if you have tools such as machine learning capabilities, so I can have my trained model ready next day using the data as of yesterday. So you can see how quickly it can be done and how effectively it can be done as compared to other vendors where you have to give them data, they have to train it on your laboratories, and then on the labs, and then send you this model for you to upgrade, and that might take about anywhere between 3 to 4 to 5 months, right? So you are much quicker, much faster when you have this capability yourself, right? And remember, fraud is a moving target, right? And it will always migrate to the path of least resistance. So, the onus is for us to give, empower our customers with certain features for them to do simple controls. That way, even if we have neglected something, they will be able to protect it, right? So, so basically empowering the customer to take that control. With that, I would like to end my presentation. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to ask me. Thank you very much for your kind attention.